Now, given the system, and given that, unsurprisingly, trap mastery, dungeoneering, rocket launching, and axing people were pretty much everything that was going on, as well as a few strategic motions. I'll clarify on this one. The cultist dude beat it back through the doors, closing them, as the big doors were opening for whatever it was he was calling. It was pretty clear that, worship it as he might, he wasn't exactly inclined to be in the same room with it. So there was some pretty good stuff about the dwarf using his brute force, because he was strong, to hold the doors closed as the thing slammed against it so they could bar the door. They looked around the secret door. Surprisingly enough, it was right there on the map, and they were able to get out of there and flank the cultists to come in upon them unexpectedly. The cultists had no reason to think that they, being devoured by the monster, would ever have had time to look for a secret door, but they did, so they did that. And so at this point, there was some pretty cool stuff. How many failures were it? This is important. How many, did they just waltz through? Because these rolls, they're maximizing, their activity. They're in exactly the place for avoiding traps and sneaking and, finding doors and, as I say, hitting people with axes and with rocket launching. So you would think, okay, they're rolling handfuls of dice. How hard is this going to be? And it's true, they had some rather good moments of sort of, I hit badassery. Bit of trap ducking, door spotting. I was beginning to think, wow, is this just going to be a walk? And as it turns out, and this is very, very similar to playing the pool, by the way, right when you think that everything, man, these guys are just waltzing through this. Look at all how are they ever going to fail? And then the failures that hit are so consequential that you're like, oh, well, then that's all right. And that's kind of how it went here. There wasn't a whole lot of failure given the optimization of the characters to their circumstances. There were failures that changed up everything. The dwarf nearly got, torn to pieces by these hyena-faced robed cultists and their claws. The Salamar was, of course, crouching in the fireplace in that room, going too, too, too. But still, it was pretty dicey, and they had to do a few. There was a real nice bit when both of the ones on the dwarf, who's really ripped up, actually, both of them actually fail to hit. And I asked Jonathan, I said, well, what's it like? They're leaping at you like I described, and they're both, and then they fail, and you're a dwarf. So what does that mean? And he goes, well, I'm short. I obviously hit the deck, and they, rip into each other. And that makes perfectly. And I was like, that's kind of what I had in mind too. And so with that, then we, it seemed that basically one shot of the rocket launcher would be enough to nail both of them. So sometimes it was pretty tactical, but again, as you can see, it worked mainly from my announcement, his roll. Then how does that work? And it kind of is very organic. There was not a whole lot of driving toward being able to take them out with one shot. But it worked out that way in this case. Other things didn't work out quite so well for them. But they did manage finally to, get out. And I was kind of pleased that we used the map and notions of motions and turns and stuff in ways that made sense that they could actually get out, not without getting spiked by the trap on the way out. They had to, let's see, I think they found that trap, but then they had to disarm it to get out, and they managed to in time. The important point just afterward, and Jonathan said, even using the words, he's like, well, I'm not the DM, he says, but can I say? And I was like, what do you have in mind? Sure. And he said, well, clearly at that point, the beautiful thing, and he, air quotes, because we all know that whatever was behind those double doors could not possibly have been beautiful. But he air quotes, the beautiful thing, I think it breaks through those doors at about that point, and it's going to be a bad day for the cult. And I said, that makes perfectly good sense. That works beautifully. Let's do it. So he found a lot of pleasure in that interaction and seemed to have a pretty good sense of how you don't just bully it in, but you do have these sort of levels of rubber stamping, who gets to rubber stamp what, and it was an interaction that I found remarkably sophisticated on analysis, even though, of course, in the moment it was beautifully intuitive and with just back and forth communication. Now, there is one element of the system that I struggled with. One of them that interests me, I didn't struggle with it, wasn't that relevant, had to do with the improvement. There is no direct improvement system in there that I found. There is a reference to the characters grow through role playing. The only mechanic about that is that each character has a belief, and that belief can evolve through play with very little stress. That may be it. I didn't find anything in there about adding abilities or about changing your numbers or anything. And I'm not stressing about that, but I am kind of interested in that aspect of this kind of play as far as Tiny Dungeon is concerned. But as I say, no need to struggle with that. It wasn't relevant in play. What I did struggle with was damage. I may have to review the voluminous text again, but as far as I can tell, when you hit, you do a point of damage. And characters are running around, with 5 to 8 hits to start, and the critters are kind of similar, I think. And I was kind of scratching my head, and I really didn't like it that they would have to actually hit like each of these 4 cultists 8 times. That's 32 freaking hits, right, to take them down. I mean, we're going to roll through 32 actions. Never mind all the running around actions and evades and focuses and stuff like that. And I just shook my head and I said, I can't do that. So I decided basically to use Elf's logic from my game Elves, which is designating foes 1 hit, 2 hit, or 3 hit. And so that's what I did. I said, well, these guys are going to be 2 hit foes, and these guys are going to be 1 hit foes. And I left it at that. It seemed, perhaps a little bit generous in the sense that they have to hit you a bunch of times for you to start taking the damage. But then again, I did swarm the dwarf with some cultists, and they were hitting him pretty bad, so he was chewed up almost all the way down. So it's not as though they were, out of danger by this. And I just thought it was fun. So I'm going to review that. Maybe I didn't read it properly. Maybe I need to look at the way foes take damage. But there they are, 6 hits, stuff like that. 4 hits, 2 hits. Some of them are 1 hit by having 1 hit point. But those are teeny things. So anyway, I just thought I'd use elf logics for the damage, and I'd be a little happier in my sense of play. There are some really, really nice combination of traits in their trait list that allows you to construct very unique monstrosities and foes. And I actually found myself very pleased and intrigued by that. It's like, I really want to set up something where these are the kinds of foes they'll be up against. And the ability to use this as a context for a more rich fantasy world or atmosphere or a thematic range of characters is pretty high. It doesn't look like it at first. You got your elf, you got your dwarf, you got your Salamar, you got your human, and you got your various traits that you could parse into the classic character classes. But you don't have to parse them that way. And just even really straightforward contextual stuff, what I like to do, provide one picture and say, all right, this is our fantasy. Make characters that work for it. And depending on the picture you choose, the trait profiles you pick could be quite distinctive. So I find myself, kind of thrilled and say, all right, this is a walk around with kind of game with a couple of pictures stuffed into it and a couple of maps, on hand in the bag. And I could probably do some pretty enjoyable fantasy that is memorable as a unique experience, especially with us riffing a little bit as we go. in a real straightforward, problem or situation, just to land him in the beginning. And the system will help at that point forward. So all kudos to Jonathan with a very enjoyable role-playing experience with the old man, and especially to, I believe it was Willie and a few other people who just came in, plopped down, and were encouraging toward Jonathan and enjoyed themselves in the room throughout most of the game.